as head of education, Lorraine has done a great job of helping extract a class from me, and so she can help you. So LA, these are always super informal. Thanks you so much for joining us. You've had such a great and colorful career, and I want to hear all about it because you're one of those folks who I love, who sort of, you didn't go immediately into BeSci. You spent some time, out there in the world, and then came to it, which is kind of my favorite, right? Because I think it's nice when it sort of naturally arises. So the way we usually run these is you got to start me at the very beginning. I know you're a Hofstra kid.
Yes.
Like, talk me through where this all sorts of start. Like, are you in college and you're like, yeah, behavioral science, like this is going to be the thing later? You're like, how did we get here?
Okay, so I guess so I was at Hofstra. I got a bachelor's in business. It's so interesting because I think I might have started before. I think it might have been brewing before, because I remember before choosing a major, I was talking to my dad. I was like, oh, like I think I want to go to school for psychology. And you have to realize I come from a family of business owners, of entrepreneurs. My dad's a business owner, my mom's a business owner, also a doctor. And so when I told him psychology, he was like, oh, just go into business. Go into business. That is set. Like, you will make money with that. So I was like, okay, whatever. I don't know much. I will follow your lead. So, and I'm actually very glad I did that, because I think, being as analytical as I am, and I do very much enjoy, business. I think the only thing that was missing was, the behavior aspect, the psychological aspect that I don't know that I was necessarily getting with that major. So, I'm at Hofstra. I then
wait, time out. We can't. You moving too fast. You're moving too fast. So wait, was this like clinical psych? Were you thinking like, hey, I'm gonna go become a clinician?
Yeah.
Or was this more like social? This was like, I'm going to become a clinician.
I'm going to become a clinician. But like this, again, I'm probably 17, 16 at the time. I'm like, oh, psychology would be nice. I like to understand why people do things. I don't know if I want to listen to their problems every day, but this could be interesting.
Did you have previous psych exposure? Did you like take an AP class in high school or something?
I did not.
It just felt like a thing.
It just felt like a thing. And interestingly enough, I took 2 psychology classes at Hofstra University. And so, I still had a little bit of exposure to that, but very much so in the business world, finance classes, accounting classes, and all of that.
Got it. So you're thinking clinician, dad says business, and you go, okay. And we go to Hofstra, we get some of that. And you took some psych classes, but it didn't. So it was sort of in the back of your mind, but it wasn't like, no, I'm going to pivot over here.
Like, no. I think honestly, I completely forgot about it. I was more so like business modes. I was enjoying my marketing classes and enjoying a little bit some of my accounting classes, my stats classes, but it was very much so I had forgotten about it.
Yeah. Well, and you were really deep in. I mean, I know that you were in the National Association of Black Accountants, like you're participating in business competitions, like you're like entrepreneurship. Like, yes. As an undergrad, like you're in the thing.
I'm in the thing because I was like VP of the National Association of Black Accountants. We won a competition. I was also in another entrepreneurship competition. We won that. And then I remember we came up with a beverage, which we ended up calling like Yo Health. And, we were selling it on campus for about like 3 months with the proceeds from the competition. So I was very much like business. This is it. I'm doing it. Those weren't the only things I was doing. I was very much involved on campus with other communities. I was the president of the Caribbean Association. I was fully embedded in my, college days, right? It was great. So it wasn't until I left Hofstra, I started working at JP Morgan in their finance analyst development program that I realized, no, this isn't it. I don't enjoy finance. This isn't, it didn't feel concrete enough to me. We were working, on financial products that honestly, they just weren't that interesting to me. I wasn't fulfilled. And so that's when I was like, you know what, let me pivot into analytics within, still at JP Morgan, but the chase side, the consumer side. And so I started working in consumer credit card analytics.
I'm going to slow you down again. You love to move fast, LA, man. Okay. So we're doing like FP&A, like pretty traditional corporate accounting.
Very traditional.
And then you went to your manager. Like, how did how did you I mean, well, let's start actually with the promoting pressure. Where did you figure out like, hey, maybe analytics might be the thing?
I figured it out. I think I was just like looking for roles, and I was looking for roles, and I think one with like consumer, it literally said consumer. I was like, you know what? Something with consumer is probably going to be more palpable, more concrete. So let me go into that route. But I remember having conversations with my manager and her leader at the time, great people, and being like, oh, I don't know if I want to stay in, finance. And they try to convince me otherwise. They were like, no, why don't you stay in FP&A? There's certainly like a great trajectory there. I was doing really well. But when you don't know where you're going, but you know that this isn't it. That's how I felt. And I had numerous conversations with them where they're like, you might as well stay because we're going to support you. You have a role with us, we'll and the professional development that I received with my manager at the time and her leader, it's unparalleled. I was very much groomed to really, think about my career, hone my career, and to take the reins of it. But I just knew this isn't exciting anymore, so I need to leave.
Got it. So there was a sort of you knew finance wasn't it, and then you started looking around, and consumer was really the part that you were like, where in consumer can I take these skills that I already have from my finance accounting, and you're like, okay. You get into this analytics. So how did the transition happen? You sort of you told your manager, sorry, it's still not going to be finance.
Still not going to be finance. And there weren't any roles in New York that I enjoyed, that I saw that I would want to do. But I found a role in Delaware. And I was like, you know what? I think this is it. So I went through the interview process, and, I kind of, I had to make a concession. I wasn't going to be able to live in Delaware. I did not want to live in Delaware, but I knew that I would enjoy the work. So for 2 years, every week for maybe the first year and a half, I was going to Delaware, from Monday to Thursday, and then coming back, Friday to New York, right? It was very much, and I mean, the team was great. The work that I was doing was very fun because I think it was the first time that I was able to own a project end to end. People were coming to me for recommendations. I was making recommendations. And that's kind of where I saw a little bit of behavioral science, where, some of the products that we were working on, we were mainly working on like credit card offers, right? So specifically, if we're putting an offer out there that says, hey, open up a credit card, you're going to get $150 if you spend X amount, or you're going to get, let's say, 300 points. Right then and there, we knew we were going to get a different type of customer applying for the credit card, mainly because cash, if you tell people I'm going to give you cash, it's more palpable, it's more evident. People don't have to like translate it to anything else. But if you're talking points, people don't know what points mean, right? And so you're getting a different type of consumer base for that reason, but also because, you're people that need cash are potentially like more risky, more at risk of defaulting. So for a lot of reasons, we were getting a different type of clientele depending on the offer. And that was probably my first exposure at, hey, the way that we're conducting the offers, devising the offers is very much linked to our profitability and whether or not we want to keep going with this, right? So
you had your own mini lab. You're like you're sort of running real world experiments, whether you meant to or not. We're like off in this. And so let's talk a little bit about that. So you get first of all, pay the cost to be the boss, like commute to Delaware, yes. Like, look at me. You know what you see a bad mother. Like you're commuting, which is a lot.
I was commuting. It was tough. It was fun though, because it was a fun team. We were all very young. We were owning all of these products. I mean, I felt like, we were running things over there. So it was very fun, but it was taxing on the body.
I heard that. I mean, that's why I chose the pay the cost to be the boss quote, because it really did sound like in some ways you had a lot of control, you had a lot of power, which is something, if you look across the fireside chats that we have, one of the things that we hear for a lot of what I think of as really successful behavioral scientists like you is they had this opportunity early on to get control, right? Where they had disproportionate power early in their career, where they were owning something sort of end to end and had that sort of experience. So it sounds like you had that too. How did you translate as you came over? Were you sort of like, reading a sequel book on the way down, like, or did it feel like the things you knew from finance made it pretty easy?
So what helped, I think, with that role was my background, in Excel, building models.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't know a lot of coding when I went into the analytics role. Like analytics is very much heavy coding, a lot of like large data sets that you have to manipulate to find opportunities, to understand whether or not something's going to be profitable, to make projections. So I really learned a lot of my coding in that role. Also because my colleagues at the time, they were more advanced. So I learned a lot of my SQL on that team. But in terms of like building models, that I had already learned, I had a strong foundation already being at JP for the first 2 years of my career. So but definitely the part that was new was, oh my God, like you make the recommendations, you're leading the meetings, telling, senior leaders, hey, I don't think this is a good idea, or this is where I foresee you to be at the end of the year. So that was new, and the coding was new as well.
Got it. So using that sort of quantitative lens to make evidence-based recommendations, right, is really starting, which is a little different than finance. I mean, finance, you're reporting a lot, but you're not necessarily recommending in the same way. So we go from this sort of reporting function to this sort of advisory function.
Exactly.
Got it. And that makes a big difference.
And I think that's probably why I wanted to steer away from finance, because I realized it was a lot of reporting. And I'm like, it could be fun for some people, but to me, it wasn't. I don't want reporting. I don't enjoy reporting. I'm not a reporter. I am analytical. I want to make recommendations. I am an advisor. So just having that opportunity along with the support in Delaware was fun. It was different. It was new. It was exciting.
And so you said you're with a kind of a young team. They're all kind of dynamic. Talk to me about your manager there. Like, how did, were there folks who want to grow you, or was it sort of like jump in and swim, or?
It was interesting because at first it was like, well, jump in and swim, right? And I had like a set of products, but they were relatively small products. And at one point I was like, okay, I can swim. I've been swimming. Give me bigger products. Nice. And I don't know that I got that support to be able to grow more and to lead more, because again, like the type of exposure and the type of influence you can get is also dependent on the size of your portfolio, right? And how many people care about it. So I don't know that I was given that opportunity to expand, but I did voice it multiple times. And so it ultimately came to a point where I was like, well, you know what? I'm not getting, he's not seeing the vision of what I'm capable of doing.
He's not on the LA train.
He's not on the LA train, and we need to find somebody that's going to be on the LA train.
Love it.
So I left.
And that's when you transitioned to Amex.
That's when I transitioned to Amex.
Well, so a lot of that was driven by sort of, hey, I've hit my cap here. They don't know how to grow me. They're not going to be open to the growth that I want to be on. And then going over to the Amex side, you stepped away from consumer because you were on small merchant, right?
I was small merchant, but it wasn't, it was still a consumer lens, because we still had to, it was a different product, different services, but the end goal was still, how do we grow our base? How do we get more merchants to accept the American Express card? Like that was the whole, like the entire time that I've been at American Express, that's essentially been like our North Star, like grow the portfolio of merchants who are not only technically able to accept American Express, but want to, and are not, telling, consumers, hey, sorry, we don't accept American Express, because that, that had been what we saw.
Yeah, exactly. But you can't use them. You can go anywhere, but you can't use American Express, right? This is BeSci, runs a CAD campaign, and even though, it's slightly illusory, but they really like to hammer that. So you go from a place where you sort of reporting to like, okay, now I'm advising, and now and then now over to Amex, where you have a really concrete behavioral goal, right? Like merchants accept cards, right? That is you could write a behavioral statement on that, right? To Martina's point, we know where the LA train is going, and the LA train is going to merchants accept cards, right?
Right. I will say though that like my first 2 years there, it's, it was more so trying to get like, learning the curve and, understanding, okay, like what are some of the tools that they're using? What are some of the services that we're offering? What are the metrics that we're looking at? And so my first 2 years there, I wouldn't necessarily say there was a lot of like, behavior, I guess behavioral science per se. However, I do know that with the partners that we were working with, because if you think about American Express trying to get more merchants to accept, we work with third parties. They work with third parties to acquire merchants. And so the behavior aspect that we injected in there was essentially social proof, right? So, let's say, we have numerous companies that we work with that acquire companies. We can be like, hey, company X, you're falling behind, right? Like companies of your size, of your dimension in your industry are doing XYZ, are meeting XYZ goals, and you're behind. And so, there are certain benefits that you will have access to, but also there are certain benefits that you won't have access to. So I remember putting together, this benchmark page and be like, oh, this is pretty cool, but not realizing, until, in hindsight, that this was very much like a behavior driven performance goals where, hey, if my competitors are doing this, I don't want to be behind. I don't want to be an outlier. Let me get my, life together and make this happen. So that was the behavioral aspect. But I would say more so those first 2 years, I was in charge of, projecting some of the metrics, understanding, okay, like how many merchants we would acquire. If we acquired them, what would be like the average transaction size and things like that.
Yeah. And so, you're learning the business. I mean, this goes all the way back to your business roots, right?
Yeah.
We talk about, behavioral sciences, business model, behavioral model, operational model. And even if we sit in that middle bit and we tend to look down into behavior, we have to be able to, a leader has to reach across those arms. You have to be able to, like, why, someone says get flu shots, you have to understand, why are they asking for flu shots? Why is that helpful to us as a business? Like, what does that even mean? Like, why are they doing it? So you're getting this sort of crash course in the culture and business culture of Amex, right?
Exactly.
How we make money, right?
Why we're doing some of the things that we're doing. Exactly.
And this is also about the time that you decide, hey, I'm going to go do the pen program, right?
Yes, because you have to understand at that point, like I had already, the Virgo in me. I've planned my life already. I'm like, I'm gonna go to college. Okay. I'm gonna leave Haiti, go to college. I'm gonna work. I'm gonna get a master's and I'm gonna go back to Haiti. So my plan was, go back to Haiti. Like that had been my anchor. And I was, trying to think like, what am I going to do when I'm back in Haiti? I know I want to have a business, but like, how am I going to be able to help? Yes, I can, open up a business, but doing what? Like, what's going to be my purpose? And how am I going to be able to help? Because you have to realize that, Haiti is a developing country, struggling economically, socially. And so well-being there isn't, there is no well-being for the majority of the population. And so I figured, okay, well, how do I help the most amount of people possible? And so that's what I was trying to like solve for. And then, so I was at a crossroads and behavioral science just came about. Honestly, I think when you're really feeling stuck and you're very open to, inspiration, I think that's when it comes. And honestly, I feel so grateful to have stumbled upon behavioral science, because at the time I was reading Freakonomics, I was reading The Power of Habit, and honestly, Freakonomics blew my mind. I was like, what in the world is going on here? I remember one of the like examples that Stephen Dubner, the author of the book, gave at the time, and we could debate this for days, but one of the things that he mentioned was Roe versus Wade, and essentially like what have been the impact for New York City's crime rate 20 years later. And he essentially attributed, the lessening of crime to abortion, right? So the people who would have had those kids potentially, raised in an environment that wasn't necessarily suitable for their growth, or who wouldn't have had the support, whatever it is, were potentially more likely to commit crime. And so those kids not being born, crime dropped, right? So again, we could debate this, but to me, I was like, holy cow, like how can one policy have such a deep impact? And I was also learning about Amazon and their one-click ordering, how, to me, I was like, this is genius. This is fascinating. I was also reading about, Sweden, how, they kind of solved for congestion pricing and all of these things where, to me, behavioral science was like a tool to be able to affect change at a large scale. And it got me really excited because I was like, you know what, with my business mindset and now armed with behavioral science, like I can do a lot, right? And so I was like, this is the perfect like marriage. Because I also knew, you know what, like I don't want to get an MBA. I had spoken to enough people who told me, well, one, if you're going to get an MBA, it has to be at an Ivy league, but also an MBA, you're not necessary. I mean, you're gaining knowledge, of course, but you're not necessarily going to be an expert in a specific arena. And I knew I wanted to be an expert in a specific arena and grow my network. I didn't want to have to choose one or the other. And so did a lot of research, and Penn was actually one of the few programs that offered.
Wait, we got a timeout. You are moving fast, and there were so many interesting things in there. We got to stop and talk about them. So, do you remember, like, how did you find, like, you picked up Freakonomics because it was on the New York Times bestseller list? Someone gave it to you. Like, where did this sort of, do you remember where this sort of hook came?
I don't know, honestly, but I'm so glad it did, because I think at the same time, a lot of things were coming up. I mean, it might have been, maybe I saw it on an ad, and with Amazon, like if you order one book,
look at one thing, man, then here's all the other books you could be reading,
all the other books. And I remember reading The Power of Habit and then looking up a few of the examples, and then other examples came up, and I was like, wait, this is a field. I can do this. And it was just, honestly, I was so excited. So like, oh my God, I think I found my calling. I think I found like what I want to do. Also, because I think with behavioral science, like there's so much, I mean, okay, being, on the quant side my whole life, I would say, also being analytical, I never necessarily thought that I was like creative. But, as you grow older, you come to, to live alone, especially New York, where you're really free to express yourself, creatively in so many different ways. I also think that with finance, I don't think I had the outlet to express myself creatively through my work. But I think with behavioral science, like depending on the project that you're working on, depending on like who you're working with, you can think outside the box and still come to the same solution, or still come with, a recommendation that's going to increase profitability or increase the customer experience. And so to me, I think, having that as a back pocket where I can experiment, where I can be creative, where I can still help you reach your goals, to me, that's just been like, I'm so grateful, honestly.
Well, there's a couple of things I want to pull out in there. So the first, I really love the point about, there was some transition from what we might think of as phenomenological, right? Oh, I'm reading books, it's got interesting case studies, to like, oh, this is a field, this is a thing, right? Like this is like a whole discipline. And there is that kind of flip. We've had, obviously, in the wake of the replication crisis, lots of conversations on the firesides about like Dan and other folks. And one of the things that I think, whether Dan is lying through his teeth or not, like those examples, just like a good story, right? Even a completely fictional story can result in real life behavior change, right?
Absolutely.
So whether or not they're true, like there is this point that it's sort of these hooks. A show is about to come out, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where we have sort of weirdly fictional Dan, like telling the FBI how to do things. I don't know. This feels
right.
Oh, we're getting a little fantasy, but I wonder about its ability to pull people in who might then do what you did, is say, oh, I recognize this is fantasy, but is it based on,
Mm-hmm.
when you look at, Criminal Minds or any of these shows that I think really did, help a whole generation of people tap into like, oh, there's a science to this. And like, I could go, that's like a science I could study. The number of people who tell me like, yeah, I want to do forensic psych because I like saw Criminal Minds. I'm like, okay, like, it can suck people in. So I love that you went through this transition where you sort of like, oh, this is a field. And it sounds like the light really came on, right?
It did. The light definitely came on. And I think, we talk about this replication crisis, and, how, researchers are only publishing results when they're positive, and, dismissing a lot of the null results. But I think in business, whenever you're devising a campaign, or whenever you're thinking about, increasing your bottom line, I think we see it day to day that a campaign, you're going to have to segment the population, whatever way you look at it, right? You're going to test it first, but also that the results, let's say you get like a 10% increase or 10% conversion, that it's not going to be driven by the entire population. It's going to be driven by maybe one or two or three maybe one or two max, and the rest are going to be negative, right? So I think that, to me, yes, there probably is a replication crisis in that, studies that have been, published, when practitioners try to apply it, at the T, it's really difficult. But I think, coming from the business side, I already understand that, when you're trying to scale a campaign, the results are never going to be, standard across, and you have to segment to figure out, where is it actually worth it in terms of effort, in terms of money, in terms of ROI. Am I getting my money back? Which population does it make sense to extrapolate to or to scale to, right? So I think having that business background helps when, trying to apply whatever research methodology was.
I love that you mentioned that concept of worth it, which I think is very much something that comes from your entrepreneurial background, right? People who come from a more hard sciences background, worth it is just, well, P less than 0.05, right? Like, as long as it's statistically true, then it's true and it was worth it, right? In business,
no,
I don't care, right? It could be P20, but if the effect size is large enough, yeah, let's do it, man. If it's free and it's effective, well, great. Like, let's try it.
Right. But it's not free. It costs a lot of money and a lot of effort to, in terms of operation, in terms of devising the campaigns. And it's, you have to prioritize. You always have to prioritize.
I love that. Yes. Both benefit and cost are thought of very differently in academia or in the hard sciences than in business, right?
Right. Yeah.
Cost becomes a whole different kind of thing. Benefit becomes a whole different kind. And there's limits, right? There's budgets. There's
exactly.
You talked earlier about creativity, and there's this notion that sometimes having constraints can make you more creative, right? So the constraints of business, hey, I can't spend infinite money and infinite time doing things, makes you do that. And I loved that you used the word prioritization. So you read this phenomenological stuff, you realize this is a field, you're like, okay, I'm going to go do this field. And you found your way to pen.
Yes. I found myself a pen. And I remember at the time, I was like, oh, I'm going to quit my job and I'm going to pen full time. And then the pandemic happened. So the pandemic happened. I moved anyway. I moved to Philly, but I didn't quit my job. So I was working and going to school at the same time.
I would really love it if this wasn't the pandemic and then you had to commute the other direction. Wherever LA does, it's going to be live one somewhere, commute somewhere else. So it's the pandemic and you're living in Philly. You're now working. You're working virtually for Amex, presumably.
Yes, right? Because of the pandemic, everyone was virtual. So I was doing both of those things at the same time. And, I learned a lot. I did a lot of consulting projects. I, learned a lot more about experimentation and the proper ways to and not to. So it really gave me the tools to feel confident about, deploying, experiments, devising campaigns. So, Philly was also different because it was the pandemic. So it was really hard to meet people. But academically, I loved it. I enjoyed the program. And I also understood that, you're kind of going to be a pioneer in this field, because behavioral science, not a lot of people understand what behavioral science is. Yes, it's in academia, but in business, it's not like people are talking about it that much. And so I also went into the program knowing that afterwards, I'm going to have to carve a path for myself. It's not going to be handed to me on a platter. But I also understood. Yeah.
So before you went, behavioral science wasn't a thing Amex was talking about. You didn't hear this in your environment. This was not a thing.
No, and it still isn't. I mean, I've talked about it at Amex. I've given presentations. I've also helped a product team, implement some changes and incorporate behavioral science principles, but it's not a thing. But I think, what I'm realizing too is, for example, when we think about my role at JP Morgan and credit card analytics, where we're creating offers based on who we think is going to apply, that's also behavioral science. So in business, what you realize is there's not a lot, but there's, a good amount of behavioral science that's applied, but people don't have the terms and they don't necessarily have the frameworks to talk about it. And there's also not enough experimentation that's happening. So it's there, but it's not like you have a dedicated team or dedicated keywords to be able to, deploy whatever it is you're trying to do.
Yeah, and the there's some sort of argument where you're sort of like, well, does the terms even matter? But it does matter because accidental science lacks some of the rigor, right? And a lot of the devil is in those details, right? Like you can falsely reject all sorts of things in business if you're not setting up your experimentation right. I've also worked with Amex over the years, so I'm aware of some of the the vernacular goes along with a framework that it's interesting. I did a conference yesterday, and one of the questions I got asked was, well, imagine you were in the elevator with the head of HR, and they said, well, behavioral science isn't a thing we do, and it's not a thing we need to do. And what would you do about it? And I said, well, I always try and start by helping people recognize their changing behavior, right? So the first thing I need to do is say, hey, getting merchants to accept a card is behavior change, right? Like that's, you want a behavioral outcome. You're not thinking of it that way, but It is behavioral. And then say, okay, well, do you acknowledge that science is, this beautiful thing that has helped humans advance? Maybe we could try using it here, right? And so in some ways, American Express is sort of accidentally behavioral and accidentally scientific rather than deliberately behavioral and deliberately scientific. And like anything, when you add deliberation, it's like working out, right? Like, you could do a lot of workouts that will make your body healthy, but when you understand your body and understand the muscles and understand like, oh, that's what that muscle is and it's feeling, you can do it a lot better. You can do it a lot differently. So that deliberation, are you so you're having a kind of a weird stochastic sort of experience, right? You're like by day at Amex where they're doing this accidentally, and then by night, like sort of doing this in UPenn where they're like very deliberate.
Yeah.
How's that feeling for you? Like,
honestly, the whole time I'm like, oh, I wish I could do more, because it was a concession, right? Like I want to give 110% at work. I also want to give 110% at school. So it's a feeling of, I want to do more. I want to be able to dedicate more. So, it is what it is. Would I recommend people do it? You do what works best for you. But for me, what would have been ideal is to do one or the other. I think for work, it ended up working out because, I got recognized and I got promoted. But I think, had I just given those 2 years, 110%, I think I would have been a lot happier. But, it's fine.
But that's okay. You are on a fireside chat giving advice to others. So it is good to call out the advice that is, I can totally recommend. And you also changed roles somewhere in the middle of the program, right? You were on merchant analytics, and then you went off into sort of segmentation and treatment, right?
Yes. So I ended up switching teams because my boss had recognized at the time that I wanted to do more marketing analytics and less partner acquisition. And so when I changed, I also got promoted at the time to senior manager.
Wait, hold on. Let's double click on that for a second, just so that everybody, can you explain sort of where the difference between those two is for the folks who might not be as familiar with finance?
Okay, yeah. So my first role was really to understand some of the metrics, like and to understand how many merchants that were able to sign up on a yearly basis or on a monthly basis, and essentially when you sign up a merchant, you make sure that they have the technical ability to accept American Express, right? So we're signing up merchants that weren't on our base to begin with, and being like, hey, now if a customer shows up, they can tap. Whether or not you accept, that's a whole different conversation, but they can tap. So that's what I was solving for in the beginning, and understanding the profile of those merchants. When I moved now to marketing analytics, I was mainly working with merchants that were already on our base, that were technically enabled to accept American Express, but for whatever reasons, at times, many times, they would be like, no, we don't want to accept American Express, even though we signed up for this program, right? And so with the second role, I was leading like the visits program, and we had a few different initiatives at the time. We had a visits program, a calls program, also an email program, but all of that with the goal of making sure that merchants are activating, merchants are, allowing transactions to happen. And a lot of the work that I did was mainly, again, we're prioritizing, right? Because there were merchants that were accepting the card. There were also merchants that were not, and we were double clicking into that. Like, why aren't you accepting? What are some of the initiatives when we visit you? What are the top points that we can talk about? What are some of the, stickers we can provide to you, conversation items that we can bring up to make sure that you understand the value of Amex. And so we were, we had a lot of surveys that went out to understand whether or not the visits were effective in general relative to, for example, a call or an email. So that was what my team was in charge of, but also, and we were thinking about different territories, right? Like which territory was doing the best, the worst, which industries. And depending on the campaign that we put out, again, which ones were more effective that we wanted to roll out on a national scale, and which one did we not want to because they weren't effective.
And so are you, so I, first of all, thanks for explaining. I think that always helps, right? So now we're on the almost more persuasive side of things, right? It's technically possible, which is your part of your previous role. Now it's, I got to get you to actually do it, right? And you're comparing all these different things. Are you starting to use the vernacular of behavioral science with your colleagues? You're sort of doing it, but not telling them you're doing it?
I'm doing it, but not telling them that we're doing it, because I think a lot of times it's high pressure, it's high, we need something like in the next couple of days. And, I didn't necessarily feel like there was an avenue yet for me to start incorporating behavioral science principles, but I knew that we were doing it specifically because one of the campaigns that the team and I built was like a national incentive program for merchants who otherwise would not have accepted the American Express card, right? So we were able to experiment with different gift card amounts. At one point we said, okay, well, if you accept, X number of transactions for 3 months, we'll give you $250. And we compared that, months later to a lower gift card amount of 150. And we realized, hey, like there's still the same, we're still seeing the same type of results. So why don't we decrease the amount to 150, right? So those were some of the things that, the team and I were doing. And we tested first in small region, well, not small, large regions, specifically New York and LA. And then we're like, oh my God, this works. Let's deploy it nationally, right? So that's one of the projects that I worked on, the majority.
So going from this sort of pilot to scale, sort of motion. And I want to double click a little bit on team, because at this point you're senior manager, director level. You've got people.
Yeah.
Who are you surrounded by? How are you bringing them along? How did you sort of start to gather, a coalition of the willing, as it were?
So I would say that, so my team was, so we were a small team at first. Well, I guess we were still a small team afterwards. We were a team of like 4 or 5 people. And at the time when I got promoted to interim director, my boss was going on maternity leave for about 7 months, right? So I had the opportunity to really lead the team, the entire program for that time. And I was surrounded by like my VP at the time, who was in India. I was surrounded by like marketing folks, channel enablement folks. It was really like a collaborative effort, but the analytics team was really the one being the advisor in terms of, this is how many folks we will need to test this. This is what we think makes sense in terms of gift card amount. And yeah, so I was working with, different team members to execute that. But also, again, a lot of concessions had to be made in terms of, okay, well, if we're going to deploy XYZ campaign, how are we going to implement it and operationalize it? And so those are, again, some of the things that working with marketing and the channel owners to make sure that, it was possible.
So you're doing a lot of, we talked about it before, about this business, behavioral, operational. So now, before there's an interplay between you and business, right? You're doing analytics that are informing business decisions, but not necessarily, doing the you're like starting to get into the operationalization side. You're sort of reaching out that direction. And when did you rip off your mask and say, I'm a behavioral scientist and let me tell you about behavioral science?
I think it was probably,
surprise!
I mean, they knew I was in school, and, Amex had been entirely supportive, specifically, at times when things were getting hard managing the two, but the team was extremely supportive. But when I ripped off the Band-Aid, it was really for my last project for Penn, where I was like, oh, I want to work on a capstone, and I think I know which team I want to work with. So I didn't work with my team on my capstone. I ended up working with a completely different team called Digital Labs, and those were a team of product managers. So I'll kind of lay the scene. So the product managers essentially created a landing page on the American Express app where card members can understand how their expenses are contributing to CO2 emissions. So, say for example, Matt, you have an American Express, let's say Platinum card, you spend $1,000 a month. You can go on that landing page and it'll tell you, hey, those $1,000 are contributing to, let's say, like 50 kilos of, CO2 emissions, right? And it's equivalent to, let's say, like 25 cars driving a year or something like that, right? And
Sure.
so that's one thing that these product managers enabled card members to do, which is become aware of their emissions, but then also you have the opportunity to offset those emissions, right? You could be like, oh, I'm contributing, let's say, 10 kilograms of CO2 every month. If I contribute $10 this month to, let's say, this reforestation project, I'm null. I've neutralized essentially my impact. And so they wanted people to contribute more on a monthly basis. And when I came along, I was like, oh, listen, like, there are definitely opportunities to improve this, because essentially you're not necessarily telling people how much they should contribute, but also people don't really know the impact of their contributions. They don't know if it's, how many, dolphins are being saved, how much plastic is being, removed from Earth. Like, because we in behavioral science we talk a lot about like relativity reference points. People need reference points not only to act but to also to understand, is this something that I want to continue doing, or to essentially to amplify something, give someone a reference point. And so those were some of the elements that I recommended to them, and all in addition to changing the way the contribution page was presented. Before, the average contribution amount was around $14, and people were just putting a random number. But now what they have is, they have different options. You can contribute, no, essentially pre-filled options, right? What they ended up coming up with was, okay, maybe like $14, $45, $60 are the different amounts you can contribute. And if you were to contribute $60, this is how many trees are going to be planted because of that. And so with that, we estimated that we'd be able to double the contribution amounts, and all of that because of behavioral science. I mean, I remember talking to the team about the different ideas that they had, and they were very excited. They were like, oh my God, like, not to say that they had never themselves implemented any behavioral science principles, but now they had a name for it. Now, I was able to share all my ideas. I remember also giving a presentation to that entire like organization, and people were like, oh my God, like this is so cool. And it is, because you realize what are some of the things that are possible and not, but also depending on what you're implementing, incorporating, some of the things can backfire too, right? So I also made sure to let them know it's not always a silver bullet solution.
But I love that. I mean, you're talking a little bit about the power of sort of naming something that people are already doing, right? Like there is that like, that oh my gosh moment of, oh, I've always kind of been on the precipice of this thing, but I've never known what it was, right? That is, I love that. And do you, so you're advising, you're branching out, you're advising teams, or like
Yes.
you're starting, did you get a little bit of a reputation internally? Like, are people starting to come to you? Are you still seeking out them? Like,
So I did get a reputation internally. I mean, that team would come to me for ideas. They'd be like, "Oh, LA, like, what do you think of this?" And I remember, even before I left, the teams were very, well, specifically that organization, because I had, built that reputation of, oh, like she's the behavioral science expert. We wish, we could bring her along. And I remember at one point I was trying to see, can I just move into that organization where I would be the behavioral, science expert. So that is definitely something that like I looked into. So unfortunately, I ended up leaving, but I do know that I left an impact, a positive impact. And hopefully now they'll consider getting like a behavioral science expert on their team.
I want to talk about leaving too, because you got a new thing.
I
We gotta hype the new thing, girl. So like, let's tell me a little bit about, so, you make the decision, you're ready to go, you leave Amex,
Yeah.
and tell me about One Lab.
Okay, so my company is a boutique consulting firm who essentially specializes in crafting experiences, helping companies and organizations and partners craft experiences that consumers are really going to enjoy. I mean, if you think about in general, the types of experiences that consumers have in the day to day, I think there's a lot of like distrust in the companies, a lot of sludges that are incorporated, and sludges are essentially, any product or service that's incorporated that has a lot of friction, and that makes it very difficult for you to, let's say, undo what you were initially going to do, right? So essentially my goal with this company is to help companies really think about the consumer journey. And I think if, once you're able to craft an experience that consumers enjoy, it's not only good for the consumer, but it's also good for you, because you get loyalty out of it, right? And so some of the services that we're going to be offering is communication planning. Essentially, if you need to revise a form, whether it's, whether I'm working with the government and they want to increase the application rate, so that's communication planning. Or product design, similar to how I help the digital labs team at American Express. Or business development, right? Because I have a background in, looking for opportunities and understanding like where to prioritize, and then also in loyalty building, right? So those are all some of the services that One Lab Consulting is going to be offering.
And so tell me a little bit about this decision to start something, right? Like, we're like completing the journey. We started over here all the way with entrepreneurship all the way back here. You obviously, super highly talented, super in demand. You could have gone to, back to Chase or another, finance company, continue to rise, continued on that journey. You said, hey, I'm going to do this thing. Tell me a little bit about what that decision was like, and sort of, what went into that for you.
I think at first I realized, and I had to make peace with that, because I was like, oh, let me look for another role. Honestly, nothing was exciting. I just looked at the marketplace. I was like, oh, I could do this. And I just, you want to feel excited about something. You want to feel, passionate. And I just wasn't seeing that. And I had to sit with that for a moment and be like, okay, why aren't you applying to roles? Like, what is it that, what is it, right? So then I had to recognize that I wasn't excited anymore about the marketplace, but also that, some of the projects that I had worked on are the ones that I had worked on with the digital labs team, or let's say the most excited about are the ones I worked on with the digital labs team at Amex, or, some of my projects at Penn, where it was very much like behavioral focused. And so I wanted the ability to be able to like pick and choose my projects, right? So that's number two. So excitement was one of them. Being able to pick the projects that I work on was number two. But also, I've always said this, like, I'm going to have my own consulting firm. Like, it's even, I was looking back at my letter, the letter I wrote to Penn to like, oh, like why they should like, admit
Your application letter.
My application letter. And I wrote that on there. I'm going to have my own consulting firm. I'm, going to be, and so it's always been something that was in the back of my mind. But I essentially gave myself an ultimatum. I was like, if not now, when?
Mm-hmm.
When? Because I am in high demand. I could go anywhere. Corporate, there are always going to be opportunities. And with some of the projects that I've worked on, I know I can find something, but the opportunity and the chance to start my own, project or my own consulting firm, I don't want to leave that to tomorrow. I want to give it 110% right now. And if it doesn't work, there's still lessons.
You're still going to be in demand, right? Like LA would not be not in demand. So.
Right. So I'm like, you know what? This is now or never. But also, I think something I always say is I do really well in a structured environment. Mm-hmm. And this is very uncomfortable. This is a lot of discomfort, a lot of uncertainty. And I want to put myself in that situation, because if I'm not doing that, then I'm not growing, right? So I don't want to not do it because I'm scared or because it's going to be uncomfortable. I want to challenge myself in this environment, and, let's see.
Well, I think that we've heard that over and over through your journey, right? There is this sense of at every step, really, you're looking for that next challenge. You're sort of saying like, hey, finance isn't it. It isn't lighting them. I love two things that really came out. One was that continual sort of, there's a terrible, terrible movie called The Replacements, in which like all the NFL players go on strike. And so they bring in a bunch of, sort of like flame out high school players, et cetera. Gene Hackman is the coach. And Keanu Reeves is the quarterback, which tells you the quality of the acting in this movie. But, there is one thing I always remember from it, which is, sort of Keanu Reeves' problem is always that he, kind of choked in high pressure situations. And Gene Hackman said, hey, winners always want the ball, right? Winners are the people who, like, in that high pressure situation, they say, no, go to me, I got it, right? I was really enjoyed recently the movie about, Nike deciding to back Michael Jordan. And there was that same sense. The scout makes the point. He says, the reason I have so much confidence in Michael Jordan is when, like, the game-winning shot was on the line, they didn't pass to a senior, they passed to this guy, right? They clearly have a lot of faith in him. And so I love that that's really coming out. You are the person who's continually sort of put your hand up and said, hey, I want that next thing. I want that, when there's an opportunity to advise a product team, I want to advise that product team. When there's an opportunity to do a thing, I want to go in. You're leaned into those opportunities. And then balanced against a really keen set of what personally excites you, right? Hey, I'm looking at these roles. I could get these roles, right? But they're just not personally exciting. They're not lighting my fire, and really staying true to the lighting of that fire. I think that's really an important part of your story, an important part of being a growth behavioral scientist. This isn't us. We have not reached the maturity as a field where you could sort of keep the safe path. There's not like a safe, like, and now I work for Matt Waller for 20 years, and first I'm at this, and then I'm at that, and then, like, you can't stay.
No.
You can't stay probably that will happen at some point. In order for us to grow as a field, we have to create the safety and stability that would allow people who don't have your chutzpah to succeed. But for now, this is a chutzpah-based field, right? So you've got a new consulting company. Like, I will, when I will post the recording, I'll have to, I put a link there in the side. We'll have to hype it up a little bit, get some projects flowing your way. We're going to convince you to teach a class. I think, you got to start thinking about, like, what would you want to teach?
Okay.
Because I think, you have a lot to give to the field. I love this, one of the journeys that we hear for you that I don't know that we hear from everybody else is this journey from business and entrepreneurship, so moving from the business model into the behavioral model section of the business. And that linkage is really key. I mean, I could see you teaching a business for behavioral scientists class, right? It is shocking to me sometimes, even some very senior behavioral scientists, I'm like, do you really need to take like a microeconomics course or something, man? Like, this is not, they just have missed some part of, that their company actually has to make money, and that their economics and things that go alongside behavioral science. It's not just sociology for fun. So
we need to make money out of this. We need to stay
gotta make
afloat.
I mean, you can do it for free if you want, but if you need a salary, that salary got to come from something.
I would love to. I would love to teach a class. I guess you and I can talk more about like what that would look like, but I definitely think the business aspect is, one of the things I could incorporate in that class in terms of like, how to make sure that it makes sense long term.
Yeah, we're gonna get you into teaching a class. You got a brand new consultancy. We're gonna send some things today. Thanks so much for joining me. I'm always so happy when I get to talk to you, and it's always so fun to get to talk through the various journeys that people have gone through. And as a Philly, New York guy for a while, I went to college at Swarthmore, so I was in Philly for a long time, and then I was in New York now I'm blissfully in San Diego. But
all the way on the other side.
Well, I'm from Oregon. I'm
Okay.
Oregon. Do you think so? I wanted to loop back to that. There was a. I'm gonna go back to Haiti. I heard in there somewhere. Is there I'm gonna go back to Haiti in this journey somewhere? Is that still on the docket? Are we looking at the future leader of Haiti? I would,
It's still on the docket, not right now. But definitely in the next, couple of years, it's my country. I love it. And I want to contribute in any way that I can. And so it's definitely something that I'm still brainstorming through, like what are some of the ways that I could help. So.
Awesome. Well, as you can see from the chats on the side, everybody was really, there were a lot of chats coming in about people like the LA train. They thought that was a good tagline for you, right? You got a shout out for being a Virgo in there, which I was like, nobody's ever shouting out my sign. You got a shout out for Virgo, and everybody's so thankful you're here. I'm thankful you're here. We'll get this up on YouTube, and you and I will talk soon.
Okay.
Thanks everybody for coming today. We'll launch the class comes out next week, but you can get a sneak preview now and sign up and get your discount. And hopefully future will get LA to do a class for you there too. All right. Thanks everybody. We'll see you soon. As a reminder. Ooh, Emily, go ahead. Oop, you've
I'm
raised your
so
hand.
sorry. I was just putting thanks in the chat and I must have triggered my hand. Sorry about that.
No,
But thank you. That was really good.
it is amazing. Talking to LA is always amazing. We'll end on remembering our favorite word here at BeSci, which is apolopoof. There's no reason to apolopoof to me. Don't apologize for things you don't need to apologize for. Emily, thanks for coming. Everybody, thanks for coming. We'll see you on down the
Thank
road.
you so much, Matt. Thank you, everybody, for showing up.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.